Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 9. We're recording it on Thursday, October 29th, 2020 at about 4:54 p.m. Eastern Time. And throughout the last about 6 episodes or so, we've been trying to present accurate understandings of God, accurate understandings of our reality, of who we are as human beings, who we are in relation to God. Okay, now we're going to move from that to exploring some of the illusions we have about God, about ourselves, and about our world. So Josh, start us off.
All right. Traditionally, our relationship to God, our understanding with God, has been defined by whatever religion we have access to. And we talked last time about, we've been taught to think wrongly about it, that there's Christianity versus Islam, and there's Judaism, there's Hinduism, there's Buddhism. But this is just so false. It's utterly false. And the same thing with science and psychology. If you look at each of these disciplines, each of these practices, and you look within them, you will find very distinct divisions within them that are the real issues. And it's how they relate to this concept of what we now call free will. When all these religions were formed, including Christianity, this concept of free will didn't even exist. From all we can tell, St. Augustine, actually, after the Bible was written, after Jesus was born, coined this concept of free will because he was wrestling with these issues himself and having so much problem with it, and came up with this concept of free will. And that seemed to I wasn't there, so I can't speak exactly, but from my take, it caused more shame, which made people flock to religion more and made the religion more popular. Then Martin Luther came along, and with the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation that we all know about, and which created all of the Christian denominations that we have today that aren't Catholic, essentially. Most people don't realize that he wrote a book called The Bondage of the Will. And he said this was the most important book he wrote. It was the foundation for the Reformation, and it was supposed to solve this problem. But today, the Protestants don't even know about it, don't even talk about this issue. It's crazy. All right. And so this issue of shame, it comes and the illusion of free will. So they're hand in hand, and we're going to try to talk that out so you can see that and see how it's time for us to evolve beyond that, because science has proven that free will as we conceive it is an illusion, and this affects how we think about ourselves and how we think about what it means to be human and how we treat each other. So do we judge and condemn each other? Do we try to shame each other into conformity? Do we try to shame ourselves into conformity? And apparently this worked for a long time. And it still does work in some regards, but what's missing is the personal relationship with it. And that's why, this idea of an impersonal God doesn't make sense. And this idea of a God that just is this religious thing that we only talk about or relate to on Sundays in this way that's detached from science or from career or family the rest of life doesn't make sense. And when you understand God is everything, and that opens the doors to understanding that we don't have to, if God is everything, that means he's also all possibilities, right? He's all possible options. And if he's all possible options, then God is also the best possible options. And so deepening this understanding and having this grace for ourselves as biological human creatures that don't have the free will that we've been lied to about allows us to create this spiritual practice where when we're having conflict, when we're having struggle, or when there's even opportunity that we're nervous, whatever it is, business or school or whatever it is, and we feel like we're failing or we might not succeed, then we realize it's a spiritual practice to not just think we have free will, so if we fail or we succeed or we're fighting with each other, that's just shame is our only, method to resolution. That's not true. By understanding God is everything, it opens the floodgates to all of science, all of psychology, all of religion to find the best personal solutions that work for us in that situation.
All right, so it seems like we're talking about more than one illusion now. I think we're talking initially about this illusion that we have a free will, this illusion that God is not sovereign, God is not omnipotent, God is not all powerful. And that illusion of having a free will leads us to experience shame. And it also leads us to afflict others with shame. And so like that's a painful kind of approach. And as Josh was saying, it's not that it's completely harmful. You know, spare the rod, spoil the child. In earlier times, they didn't have advanced civilization like we had now. You know, they may have, you know, they probably had to resort to shame to get people to do what was in their best interest. But now we're evolving beyond that. So I think that this second illusion might be termed the illusion of no pain, no gain. You know, you hear this in sports a lot, you know, if it doesn't hurt, you're not doing anything valuable. That is a very, very harmful illusion, because that gets people to afflict themselves a lot and afflict others. So like relative to shame, yes, shame works, but it's another way of seeing this is the carrot and the stick. You know, we can be good to people and bring out the best in them as a way of you know, helping them become better people, more virtuous, or we can threaten them like our criminal justice system does, like our religions do, you know, too much still. So what Josh is referring to is this illusion that shame is necessary for our moral evolution to become better people. It's not that it's completely useless, but as Josh was saying, we need to evolve beyond it. To the extent we do, we can create a world where we're teaching our kids to do good, not because of a fear of punishment, because it feels good to do good, because they're going to become happier as they do good. And the people who they treat well are going to become happier.
Yeah, George. To lay it out how I've come to appreciate it the most is, you know, this free will issue and it being an illusion is fundamental. And what happens if you don't have relationship, right? So what happens is we shame the person, and that anytime we shame each other, it hurts the relationship, right? Next time we interact, we're not going to be so relational. And, you know, whether it's an adult to a child, you know, that child goes inside and isn't as open to talk with adults and get wisdom as they would have been, right? So what it's really doing is it's devaluing our personal experience, devaluing our experience in the world. And this is designed, shame is designed to shut down the brain, right? And to shut down thinking and self-expression. So what happens is when we don't have a proper relationship with this concept of the illusions and the illusion of free will, we can't have a proper relationship with each other, right? And so what happens is because of this illusion of free will and we project it onto each other through shame and other ways, we become overly self-conscious. We think that we are flawed and we are wrong in ways for things and in ways that were beyond our control, you know, and that the real shame in this is that there are solutions, right? Whether it be, you know, depression, addiction, ADD, whatever it is, right? Previous generations long ago didn't even understand these terms. They thought everything was sin. All of those things would just be sin, reasons you deserve to go to hell, and, you know, you just need to repent and change your ways, you know, on your own, right? But now we understand that it's much more complicated than that, right? And so I've come to appreciate the second and third concept of the illusions of, you know, the illusion of what consciousness is and the illusion of what self is, right? And many religions talk about this, and many scholars and psychologists and theologians have written books about this as well. Each of these illusions separately and together. So, you know, that being the key essence that helps a lot of people get it. When we don't have a proper relationship with, you know, this illusion of free will and that it is an illusion, we think of ourselves in the wrong way, right? And we blame ourselves and we blame each other, and that causes us to become overly self-conscious, right? And this is what damages the relationship with each other, with ourselves, and with knowing God, because God is everything, and in everything there lays many possible solutions and resolutions to that problem, right? But if we just go to shame, then we're not going to look at those.
All right, excellent. So like, I want to like now pull back and, you know, relate why we're saying the free will is illusion. I mean, we did some episodes on this, basically describing God's attributes. And, you know, just briefly to summarize, the Bible presents God as the creator. That's the first first line in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And understand the logic, okay? If you create a world, there's absolutely no way that you're not in complete control of that world. You know, that's the reality. Because another way to understand this is, for example, God presumably was all that existed before God created the world. Well, if God is all that existed before God created the world, God was the only substance that God had to create the world from. So this world we live in, and we can see it as our universe, our 13.8 billion year old known universe that we can observe, then we have to conclude that God is this universe. So if God is everything and everywhere, again, it's impossible that God isn't in control of everything. And so, like, naturally, if you understand that, all of a sudden you understand, wait a minute, if God created this world and God is everything, you know, and God is therefore all powerful, you know, all knowing also, because again, if you're everything, there's absolutely no way that you don't know everything, then that makes free will completely impossible. And that's what leads to the shame. You know, if we don't see God correctly, if we don't see that God is the creator, God is everything, God is the universe, God is all knowing, God is all powerful, then that's going to lead to a lot of illusions. All right, now, Josh, you referred to some other illusions. I don't know if you want to get into them right now, but you were referring to the illusion of consciousness, the kind of consciousness we believe we have, the illusion of our sense of personal self, because, you know, again, our lack of proper understanding of God leads not just to this illusion of free will, it leads to many other illusions that are very, very harmful.
Certainly, George. Yeah, just really quickly, I think we'll get into it in more episodes. When you realize that, you know, in previously in religions and even the early science, they thought we were conscious. We were. If you look at the etymology of consciousness, you know, right now we use it as you're conscious, you're awake. But if you look at the etymology, the way that word first came to being is whether or not you know. Whether or not you know you're doing wrong, right? So it was always around this moral issue, and you know, the what we come to know now is that it's not this one thing. You're not conscious awake. You have many parts of your brain going on at different times, and sometimes you're more alert, more awake than others. And if some part of your brain's overfiring, it's going to cause a problem, or if it's underfiring, it's causing a problem. And now science is starting to understand, you know, how we can work with those to solve these human problems and, you know, be the person we want to be. It's essentially almost like we're creating free will, but just free will through the sense of learning to respect consciousness and respect, you know, biology and chemistry and these causal mechanisms, which are all ultimately, you know, aspects of God, if God is everything, and then being able to modulate consciousness, right? So, you know, many people may not be used to talking about it in these terms, but everybody's living this out, right? Whether you have coffee in the morning to wake up, in those days you don't have coffee, you're groggy and you might not do as well on a test, or, you know, for some people, you know, if you're having coffee, it may make you more angry or too energetic and you lash out at somebody, right? So it's just having this personal relationship with consciousness, with your own consciousness, and with what all of our consciousness is. And consciousness is the response to stimuli, right? It's this relationship to whatever the stimuli is, right? Whether it's a drug, whether it's TV, whether it's politics, you know, and seeing how that affects our mind and causes our mind to act and do things, right? It's not a complicated concept, but there's obviously, you know, it's taken humanity a long time to discover this. So I think we'll keep visiting the show, and you can see how, you know, if you don't understand these things and the only tool you have is just to blame yourself, you know, it's your fault you failed, you know, no matter what, you know, your fault that you couldn't pass the test, failed school, your business failed, you know, you committed a crime, or, you know, whatever it is, then all you can do is blame yourself. And this is, you know, where religion, you know, kind of was tempted to overutilize this, to push it too much, to exploit it, because they realized if they make people feel bad and they make people feel like they're going to go to hell because they're bad, then, and they have to come to church to not go to hell, then they're going to come to church more, right? and which is, is still legitimate, is still, has potential for transformation, as long as when they come to church, when they come into religion, they are given access to all of God, all of science, all of psychology, and all of the solutions that could essentially prevent them from what would be called just sin otherwise.
All right, so let me see if I can frame this illusion of consciousness from a different perspective that I believe coincides with what you've been saying. Basically, this illusion of consciousness is in a sense the illusion of a personal consciousness. We believe that our consciousness is ours, as individuals, whereas you have to understand, if God is all powerful, if God is everything, all knowing, then our consciousness, and I'm defining consciousness, and it's not just according to what we do, but basically there are about 20 or more definitions of consciousness in psychology. The one that's most agreed upon over the last several decades at least is that consciousness is generally aware of. When we're conscious of something, we're aware of something, and naturally that leads us to react or respond to whatever we're aware of. So like, if we're aware of anything, the only reason we're aware of it, and that's our thoughts, feelings, or each other, whatever it is we're aware of, it's because God is compelling. It's basically, we are reflecting God's awareness. God is compelling us to be aware of anything we're aware of. So it's not like we have a personal consciousness. We are expressing God's consciousness. So naturally, if our consciousness is not ours, then you can see how that brings us together, that unites us. In other words, like, it's not about us. It's not about 7.5 billion individual beings on this planet, each with a distinct personal consciousness. It's about all of us sharing God's consciousness, all of us expressing God's consciousness, all of us being a part of God. And that's got to be a very unifying principle for us, as a people, as a species.
Certainly, George. I mean, you can see it, right? So even with the negativity around this election coming up, unfortunately, so we have this government institution that's in charge of us, that has these politics, and is just filling the media, and it's just a lot of negativity, right? And so you can see how that's affecting our individual consciousness because of this collective consciousness thing that our leaders are embracing, and not demonstrating the best ways to relate to each other and the best ways to relate to these challenges and struggles and concepts, right? And I think that's unfortunate, and so why a lot of people, give up on politics and check out, because they realize it's just making them be more negative around their family, or, more depressed or whatever. And there's just many instances of that. I'm kind of reminded of, I forgot it. I'm reminded of, what it might be like if our education system was different, where children meditated more, or talked more about these aspects of reality that are ultimately relational. These aspects of being human that are much more beyond our control than kids are taught in school today. And education is making great progress. A lot of the schools are embracing these concepts of social and emotional learning with great success. And that was just something that came to mind while you're talking.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the topic of education, because in a certain sense, like you were saying, the media, politics, they form our consciousness. They mold what we're aware of. The media easily. I mean, like, I go through the news, I go through New York Times, Washington Post, Google News, and they're selecting for me what stories, what information I receive. In the schools, it's the same thing. So let's pull this back to God, and basically, what is the purpose of understanding God? What is the purpose of religion? What is the purpose of society, of civilization? It's all about happiness. Again, we've said this before. Through decades of countless surveys, when social scientists ask people, what do you most want from life? The number one answer is always happiness. When they ask, well, what do you want most for your children? The number one answer is always happiness. So like with our educational system, they are failing our children because basically they're preparing, yes, if they're doing a job, they're preparing our children to go out into the workforce to serve society, but they're doing not so good of a job at teaching our children what God, it's not just about what we want, it's what God wants most for us, that we be happy. And another thing about happiness is, like, to the extent that we're happier people, generally speaking, we become more virtuous. Because, basically what we do is intended to seek happiness. As biological creatures, we seek pleasure, avoid pain. And sometimes, if we're not happy enough, we will seek happiness in ways that are not virtuous. So basically, if we can teach our children from a very early age to understand that, yes, God wants us to be happy. That's our fundamental desire in life, our really pretty much our only desire. Then our schools can educate our children to be happier and have what they want and please God. And again, there are so many benefits of becoming happier. Happier people are healthier. They have better relationships. They earn more money. They live longer. I mean, there's so many benefits to becoming happier. So that's one thing that, if we understand that our consciousness, what we're aware of, is molded by our society, and we want to tie this in with our conception of God and understand that God and religion exist, that God especially wants our greatest happiness, then we have to understand that we need to mold our society, our culture, like our school systems, to reflect that and teach us, help us gain this quintessential blessing in life.
Sure, and I think that understanding these illusions really plays into it because when you're blaming yourself for things that really you had no control, but you believe for some reason that you had control over, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to find solutions and resolutions that will fix those problems so you can be happy around them. And I think that people benefit when they realize that they already understand these illusion principles, right? You go to a movie to feel a certain way or to have an experience that you couldn't have on your own, even if you were just watching your TV or a movie on your iPhone, right? Because consciousness can then be emerged, and then it can lead to these feelings. In the same way with music, the same reason we have relationships and conversations, because we're seeking these emotions and these states that make us feel good. And just because they make us feel good, doesn't mean they're selfish, doesn't mean, that's a waste of time or arrogant or evil or sinful or anything like that. This is how we are designed. This is how God designed us to seek out these states, because, it's proven, whether it be an addiction or depression, or literally any kind of conflict, right? If the individual is supported and has the spiritual discipline or the spiritual ability to seek out states of happiness, then they're a lot more relaxed, they're a lot more clear-headed, their brain is a lot more healthier, and they're able to come to better solutions and be more peaceful when things get stressful and there's any type of conflict.
All right, so to review briefly, we've gone through some of the illusions. This illusion of free will that leads to the illusion that shame is necessary and better than not shaming each other. Now this illusion that we have a personal consciousness, when it's really like our consciousness is molded by God or by our culture, by our society, depending on the perspective we want to address. We've got about 4 minutes left in this episode, and I'm not sure we're going to get to this. This is another complicated concept, but it's important. It's an illusion that's important for us to understand if we're going to evolve. We have this, along with this illusion of a personal consciousness, we have this illusion of a personal self. So Josh, start us off with that, and then help us understand how this idea that we have a personal self is illusory, and it's beneficial for us to evolve beyond it.
Sure, George. We all know this rationally, logically. This is the whole point of genetics and epigenetics. We know that we aren't in control of our genes. We aren't in control of how our brain is structured. But because previous generations long ago didn't know that, and all they could do is just to essentially blame each other to try to get the desired behavior. We've inherited this ways of thinking, and our whole language is structured, and our whole society and our, you know, our cultures are fabricated on this illusion of self. And a lot of the religions, you know, particularly the Eastern religions more so, talk about this illusion of a personal self. Um, but it's inherent in all religions. Um, and when you understand, you know, it comes down to really two things, I think, is um, people trying to be the way they want to be, whether that's by changing or by staying the same. So the self is essentially our ability, you know, to perform consistently, right? Respond to stimuli consistently. I can kind of know what George is going to say, and I can have this relationship on with who George is, because his biological self has this consistency, right, to respond the same over time. And this is also, you know, how we think of personality as well. But it's very important to realize, you know, just because a culture, you know, is fairly consistent and acts one way doesn't mean another culture, you know, those same people, if they grew up in a different culture or a different religion, they would act the way that culture, that religion does. And they would feel like that's their self and they're choosing to do that, whatever. And that's false. And it becomes very important to extrapolate that concept to realize, you know, even in our own culture, when people are having trouble, you know, with themselves, whatever the behavior is, whether it's change or consistency, you know, addiction or anger or frustration or even just job performance, right? Or academic performance, you know, they may want to be a better person more so than the people who are just easily able to pass the math test or be nice all the time or whatever it is, right? They may want it more, but just because they want it more doesn't mean they can. And this gets back to that illusion of self, you know. So if we're teaching people to have this false pride in their sense of self, you know, then without this balance of the illusion of free will and what consciousness really is, then, you know, we're never going to reach societies and cultures that treat each other fair and equally and actually can truly help each other be the people that we want to be.
All right, so we've got about 30 seconds left, and we've just begun to explore this illusion of a personal self. So next episode, we're going to continue, see it from a theological standpoint, see it from a collective standpoint, that essentially there is no division between us and the rest of reality. It is really one being, and we're just part of this one universal personal self. And so we'll explore that in more detail on the next episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow on God.